welcome. Let's get started. So, welcome everybody. Thank you, my friends, for showing up and participating in this panel. This is Twin Cities Startup Week 2020, Founders Panel, Lessons Learned in Growing Your Social Enterprise. We'll be going until 1:45 today, so keep in mind it's only a 45-minute panel. This is more speed dating than it is like a seminar type of a thing. The panel discussion we have today is lessons learned in growing your social enterprise. And we're going to talk to three amazing social entrepreneurs here in the Twin Cities and learn a little bit about what motivated them, challenges they faced, and how they've had to adapt over time to some of these challenges. So I'm going to, So we'll take a few minutes and have the panelists introduce themselves and the social enterprise they founded. Because we don't have a whole lot of time, we're going to go in the same order for all the questions, and we'll go with Laurie, Emily, and then Isaiah. So first, can you just introduce yourself briefly and the social enterprise you founded?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Laurie Moss, and the enterprise that I started was Binary Bridge, and our product is Backpack EMR here on the wall. And so my background is all software. I was in software development for about 20 years or so, doing coding and design work, and then doing some product management. So that definitely helped prepare me for entrepreneurship. But in keeping with the theme of our talk here, I thought I'd also mention I played rugby for about 15 years. And cool. When you want to talk about getting bruises on your shins, I certainly got plenty of those and got kicked in the face with metal cleats on a regular basis. So I will say that certainly prepared me for what entrepreneurship is all about, kind of getting knocked down and getting back up again. So super quick on what we're doing is Backpack EMR is really meant to help with the delivery of healthcare in rural villages. And so we're doing that through technology. We're trying to improve patient outcomes, helping with, access to patient histories, to follow-up care, all those things that you can think of with an EMR or electronic medical records that just is not present in really rural off-grid sort of locations. So that's briefly what we're doing.
Nice. Thank you, Laurie. And I'd like to congratulate you on your recognition by 1 in a Million. Can you briefly, just in a sentence or so, tell us what that's all about?
Yeah, sure. This was a new thing for me. I didn't really know about this. We were nominated by a good friend, Jeff Urban, and he and I worked together a while ago. The group is called Multiplying Good, and the award is called 1 in a Million. And kind of their tagline for this award is that we were among the millions of people who are putting others first and using service as a solution to the problems we're facing. Nice. So we're really excited to get that award.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
And now we'll pass it to another tough person with an athletic background who's taken pucks to the shins for the Syracuse University Orange women, Emily Hunt-Turner.
Hey, thank you. I was just going to say rugby. All right. Yeah, I got some bruises on the ice. I won't lie. Always happy to meet a fellow athlete. Tim, real quick, just because lovingly my computer, my Wi-Fi cut out. Just a brief background on Allsquare, what we do.
Yep,
cool.
Please.
So Allsquare is a social enterprise located in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and we exist really shortly just to invest in folks who've been impacted by the criminal justice system. So currently we do that through a 12-month fellowship where we have 14 justice-impacted fellows travel through a year fellowship. And we have a grilled cheese restaurant where a lot of the workforce happens. We pay a living wage, super proud of that. But our Professional Development Institute, which is focused in on law and entrepreneurship, is the piece I think that sets us apart, hopefully in a positive way. Investing in the futures and professional pathways of folks who've been impacted by the system. So that's a little bit about what we do.
Awesome. Thank you. Isaiah.
Yeah. Hey, everybody. Excited to be back. I was here about a week and a half ago for the Twin Cities Startup Weeks, and we were talking about money verbs. So I've been a financial advisor for about 9 years now, the last 4 with my own financial planning firm called Becoming Financial. And what I found is that as many people as I could help in my entire career, it would probably only be a couple thousand people just based on physical time and capacity. And so we wanted to create something with money verbs that would allow people to access financial knowledge, practice the skills of money and really experience money in a different way. And so we're live in the iOS and the Android store. And we decided to make sure that we incorporate it as a public benefit corporation because of some of the work we did with this great group called EcoTown. And we found that, if people get better at money, that it can actually improve our community. And so super excited to share our bumps and bruises along the way.
Sweet. Thank you, guys. Well, first, really quickly, you're out there in the world playing rugby and skating around, skating to where the puck's going to be. What was that moment that really catalyzed the catalytic moment that you knew that you were going to take action and start this social enterprise?
So for me, as far as Backpacking Margo's, I had been working at Target, helping with guest data management right after the breach, and so data breach, and I was very concerned about data, but at the same time, wasn't feeling like I was really doing as much as I could. I was kind of a cog in a really big machine, and so I wanted to do something a little bit more. So I went on a trip with my sister. She would do orthopedic surgeries in Peru. And so I just went along to see if I could help with some efficiency gains, maybe some automation. And I noticed they were doing everything on paper, which is not all bad. Paper is sometimes the exact right tool to use in certain scenarios. So I didn't go in with some sort of notion of bringing technology for sure. But after seeing what was happening, it was really hard for me to watch that they would see these patients recurring every few months, but they didn't have that past information. And so they were constantly trying to figure out what was going on. And then additionally, as far as planning wise, they stayed up until 1 o'clock in the morning after a clinic day to try to figure out who would get surgery the next few days. And it was because they were shuffling papers and they had photos on someone's phone and some iPad, and they tried to figure out where all the information was. And it was a little bit chaotic. And again, not that they were doing a great job. They were doing great surgeries, but I think there was some room for improvement. So that's why I thought, I'm quitting my job. We're doing this. And so that's when we had some market validation. We quickly pivoted, though, to primary care away from surgery and trying to really work with those groups doing primary care overseas to help do local, kind of leave information locally so they continue to do follow-ups. So kind of our pivot was pretty quickly from surgical groups over onto primary care. But that was kind of that catalytic moment. Like, I think there's a better way to do this. We can do it for pretty cheaply for these groups, and I think we can make big improvements.
Thank you. That's an awesome story.
That's great. Catalytic, not Cadillac. Okay. Yeah, I think I haven't had a lot of Cadillac moments in my life, but they're coming.
Yeah, they're coming.
The Cadillac, I think the catalytic moment for me, well, twofold. One, I when I was in Louisiana.
Can I just stop for a second? I think being recognized by Time Magazine as one of the 100 most important social enterprises in the world last year was pretty fucking Cadillac. I mean, pretty dog Cadillac.
Thanks for that.
Emily.
Nice little shout out there. Thank you. That means a lot. So for me personally, in my own journey, it was twofold. So I was practicing law down in Louisiana, which is the incarcerator of the world. And I got this really beautiful opportunity to meet a gentleman named Herman Wallace, who was a member of the Black Panther Party, a member of the Angola 3, and he was in solitary confinement for over 40 years. And that's through that work, that's actually where I met him on the inside. And purely transformative human. And I think it was embarrassingly such an eye-opening moment for me of what's transpiring in this country, particularly as it relates to race and racism and mass incarceration. The moment that was sort of the catalyst for Allsquare was I was working here as a federal attorney for the Department of Housing here, meaning Minneapolis. And there was a case, I won't go into the full details, but suffice it to say, a gentleman who was a Black gentleman was essentially applying to live under the same housing provider, applying to live in a majority white community, even though he was currently living in a majority minority community here in the Twin Cities. And again, same housing provider, and applied to live in this majority white community, he and his wife. And for some reason, they ran a criminal background check when he was looking to move into that property, but hadn't run it in the majority minority community. And when they found that he had a record, they not only wouldn't let him move into the new unit, but they evicted him. And I will also say, here's the real kick. That's some BS if you ask me straight up right there. But beyond that, his record was 41 years old. It was a 41-year-old record from, he was like 18. And it was that was a moment for me of like, this is crazy.
So mine was a little bit over time to this point where it was kind of like, all right, I have to do something. So I had met with people over and over and over again, and they wanted advice on strategy. How do I budget? How do I pay down debt? How do I build up credit? And so that's why I created my own financial planning firm, because then I could do fee-based planning and really help coach and advise for a fee and not necessarily have to sell a product. So that kind of kept leading to it. And then I realized, over time where people kept saying, can you meet me on the weekend? No, I can't. Can you meet me 8:00 on a Wednesday? No, I don't want to. I really don't. But I would love to help, so here's some articles, or here's a quick video that I put together. And before I knew it, it was kind of like, okay, I think there's this really big market. There's a need for this. So we surveyed like 300 people, and I think it was like 96% of people said they wanted it. And we were like, okay, we're ready to make something happen.
That's awesome.
Wow.
Thank you for that. So you guys, you've got the best laid plans. You've seen a market opportunity. People are asking for it. There's a need. But someone comes and checks you from the side or kicks you in the face with spikes or whatever tends to happen. We were calling it bruising your shins on the coffee table. But Laurie, can you tell us a little bit about some of the stories that people don't hear when they're talking to early stage startups, because you want to paint a rosy picture, but tell us some truth that happens and what that meant.
Sure. Yeah. I think some of the front-facing stories are, for example, we got funding through the Venn Foundation, or we got funding through some angel investors, and we're all excited. That's great. However, it took me 300 or more pitch events and pitching engagements to get that. And so I think for me, one of the big things that I didn't know going into this was how hard it was going to be to raise money. It has been a full-time thing for me since I started in 2016. I've been nonstop pitching. And I think one of the things from a lessons learned and what you can do to maybe not have to pitch 300 times to get your investment might be to get some help early. And I didn't think I needed any help pitching. This was a cause I felt so strongly about. Mm-hmm. I knew we were on the right path. I knew this was the right way to go to bring technology to this industry. However, I could not tell my story well enough that investors could get on board. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize that was happening. I know I would pitch, I would tell the story. It could take an hour for me to really get through to people, but I didn't get through enough where they wanted to give money to the cause. And so what really helped us, and what I wish we had done early, was talk to people who have done this before. So I think it's Pitch Well. Julie, she's great. She is able to hone in on exactly what your root, kind of your root story is and what's going to impact people, because you have a good story. I'm sure you have a good story. You just got to learn how to tell it better. Another thing would be professionals like Ecotone. Mm-hmm. So we did go through an engagement to get our impact metrics, and investors want to see that you're truly making an impact and you're measuring it. So that's great that I could say, for example, medical records, we all kind of have this idea that medical records are going to help. We've obviously implemented them here in the States, but what's the data? How do we know that that's going to help in these different low-income countries and these really rural locations? Where's the proof, And so a lot of those kind of things helped us then to get our investment eventually. So that would be my lessons learned is, don't get stuck pitching 300 times before you get your investment. Quality over quantity. Spend a little money up front so you can get that bigger check early. That would be my advice.
Nice. Thanks, Laurie.
Yeah, I think for me, I swear I'll be succinct, but there's three big ones that stand out for me. One, so right after I launched the Kickstarter for Allsquare, and it was successful, thank goodness. But both my parents passed away pretty unexpectedly within a few months of that. One passed 2 months after, and then 10 months later, my father passed. And just from a personal grief perspective, took the wind out of my sails and my heart for quite a long time. So that was really difficult. The bank, multiple banks to whom I will not name at the moment, but I was quite disappointed to learn when we were trying to get Allsquare construction loan off the ground that even with a fully cash collateralized loan, they wouldn't facilitate or broker the loan. And I think it was because of the stigma, frankly, that came with employing folks with criminal records. And as a white woman too, it was like, damn. I mean, if it's hard for me in this moment with a fully cash collateralized loan, I can't imagine what's happening every day. It was really an eye-opening moment. And the third, I would say, as far as the bumps and where they came from, and this is hard to own, but it is definitely part of my truth and my story, was really just from community. And I think where that came from is I learned that as an entrepreneur, you get some latitude, and when you get the bumps and bruises, often it's you and potentially your family that has the impact. But when you launch something without the requisite infrastructure and without the proper community foundation in place, the impact actually also extends to those that you're looking to invest in. And that was a really detrimental hit for me to understand that I had built a lot of Allsquare with folks from New Orleans, formerly incarcerated and currently incarcerated folks in New Orleans. And that was great, but like they weren't here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I came here it's a long story. But I really learned, and I feel so proud that my team has come together to build that in the last 2 years, but we didn't have it right away. And I think it caused some unintended but real harm. And that's kind of my worst nightmare, is to do harm in that regard. And I think we did, and I did unintentionally. So that's kind of some bumps and bruises for me that are painful but super real.
Thanks, Emily.
Totally. Couple for me. One is just, as a founder, when you're doing your own business, like for my advisory platform, it was just me, right? Like go, work harder, stay up later, wake up earlier, just figure it out. When you start hiring people, then it gets interesting. And I think one of the big, shin bumps is you got to make sure, of course, you're trying to do it as affordably as possible. But as a founder, you got to make sure that they can do the work that you need. So we, started with one development team and had to make a little bit of a pivot while we're developing the app, because, they're looking up code as they're coding. And they're like, you don't know how to do that, do you? So it's pretty important, you make sure that the people you bring on board can do the right things that you need them to do ahead of time. And you might have to pay extra or wait longer or, do something different. But really making sure this team or this partner I'm working with can do the things we need. And then the other big one is customer research. So as an advisor, I was so excited, like, I'm going to teach everybody about money. And I started thinking about all the lessons that I could build. And we researched and we did surveys of our user demographic. And they were like, we don't like it. And it hurt. I was like, what do you mean? It's beautiful. We can teach you all about money. And what they found is they don't really want to just get more financial literacy, because there's plenty, right? There's a million websites and all the different talking heads that talk about financial literacy, but they wanted practice. They wanted action steps. So that's where it was, for me, in a good way. We did the research and then we learned, okay, we have to frame it different and treat money more like a skill, like an instrument or like a sport. So something that you learn, but you also kind of develop these skills. And so once we found that research, now that's what we do. Every 2 weeks, we're surveying our users to say, do you like this? What else? Do you like this? What else? And just keep it going.
I think we could all learn from that, So Laurie, you're talking about shin bumps in fundraising. Emily talking about that network didn't really translate up from New Orleans. And Isaiah, customer research. The next question is, what did you learn and how did you pivot? Like, what kind of strategic moves or tactical moves did you make coming out of that shin bump moment of learning, that little bit of a shock to your expectations?
Yeah, for me, I definitely spent some time with some experts on refining the pitch. Definitely worked with Ecotone, like I said, with impact measurement, which has been super helpful. A little bit more feedback. I would, as soon as I would do a pitch for an investor, I would always ask how it went, or did they have any feedback for me, or what struck them as, what could they relate to? What did they not relate to at all? And so that could help me inform for my pitch next time. And that has really helped as well to refine that pitch. I've also done more research on the investors before I pitch. So initially, I would pitch to anyone who would give me 15 minutes of their time, and I don't do that anymore. So now I do a lot more research on what sort of stage are they going to be giving money to, what's their check that they're going to write. I researched their portfolio companies. Are there any that are like me? I check and see, do they do healthcare? Are they working at global? Do they look at any sort of impact? Do they look at, these really rural communities? Because if they don't, they're not going to like my pitch any more than they would like another person's pitching something similar. So it doesn't matter how good I am at that point. So a lot more research up front. And then I would say one piece of feedback I've gotten a lot from either investors or other mentors is confidence. It's one thing that, it ebbs and flows, right? Some days I'm feeling really confident, other days not at all, which is hard because I do feel confident in what we're doing. It's just some days I'm not feeling it. And so that was one thing I got a lot of good feedback on was, and it was hard feedback to hear because it's not like just tweaking your pitch deck or add more graphics or add more of this. Like you got to somehow within you figure out how to be more confident about what you're doing. But that would be some advice to give other people to like find what it is inside you that makes you confident about what you're talking about. Just remind yourself why you're doing it, before you're pitching, even though you're doing, 10 pitches a week or whatever, it might get repetitive, but just remember, you got to be confident in order to pitch that to these investors. So I think that's how I tried to take that feedback, right? Take some information from the investors and try to make it better so I can do better.
I hear you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I think with me, I get passionate when I get into the weeds a little bit. You guys all know, but like to try to show up as that enthusiastic cheerleader is almost impossible for me to do that every time. But it usually takes like 10 seconds of connecting with someone, and then it's like, okay, here's you can feel my passion come out because we're engaged in some bit of something real. But I know what you mean about like, how do you wake up every morning and try to be like, yeah, we're going to crush it. And especially when you're on some part of the Dunning-Kruger that's like, I kind of know I don't know a lot about some stuff. And you're like, I don't know. Anyway, thank you.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate that. I mean, it also reminded me sort of like a personal mantra, which I've had quite a few the last few years. But I think it hit on this for me too. I think, just being frank, as a white woman in criminal justice work, never been to prison, it's like, where do I belong in this work and I do it responsibly? So I think I'm always questioning and trying to find that confidence. And for me, it's been less about like, I feel good and more about like, do I belong in this space at this panel in this conversation, and checking in with my team and our fellows about that, because oftentimes I don't. And then that alleviates that whole thing altogether, right? Is I feel like if I can get over that hump of like, yeah, I belong here and this is a good thing, then I can feel confident. But beyond that, it's really been an interesting finding that confidence and staying true to it. It's been a journey. So a few things. One, with my parents, what I learned, I think, and how I pivoted was I just surrendered. I think, I had that fear of like, shit, I just launched a Kickstarter and it was like, people want to see a restaurant like now. And I think I had to just get comfortable with surrender and just owning that, like, this isn't what I planned and it's not what I envisioned, but here it is. So I'm going to let myself recover a little bit. Banks was resilience for sure. That was the pivot, was I'm going to just go to another one and another one and another one. Cause there wasn't much more I could do other than get it, fully cash collateralized by people who were into it. I didn't have the funds myself. And then with community and the response, like the feedback I got there, is interesting that you bring that up, Tim. I think for me, it was really twofold. I think the pivot was, one, slowing shit down, like just really, a gentleman in the community who I really respect had said, when you're in this work, you got to move at the speed of trust. And it's not always about growth and scaling and whatever. And if it is, in this work, especially, you might be in the wrong space. So for me, it was definitely a lot about how can we get the fellowship? How can we process, improve, and iterate and engage fellows that like we've never done before, to make sure that we're building, similar to what you said, Isaiah, right? Like building this thing with the people that we want it to actually benefit, not building it for them. And then I think a law firm next year, and I won't go into all the details, but I think for us, we're partnering with community, most importantly, currently incarcerated legal scholars here in Minnesota in Stillwater and Shakopee prisons. And we're working on sort of collaboratively with community, making sure that they have access to ABA accredited law degrees and paralegal degrees. And where I think that we're building with community, not for, which I think has been really important. And really taking their lead. And two, I think we've also been similar to what you were saying, Laurie, about just like more research and more thought. And again, like moving at the speed of trust. So like if we have this pipeline and there are folks currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated folks pursuing, law degrees, where are they going to work when they're done? What are the character and fitness requirements of the Minnesota bar? And will they be able to actually get licensure? There's like a lot to do it responsibly. There's a lot of different components that need to be worked out. And so I think different than Allsquare Fellowship, we kind of launched it and then figured it out. I think we'll still be doing that, as you guys, I know, as you're builders, like that you're always building and you can't get it right out the gate. But I think at least we're going to be able to look back and say, we learned a lot and we slowed things down a lot, and we really were thoughtful about components and the sensitivities that we built into this thing in a way that we weren't with the original sort of fellowship and restaurant. So that's some of the ways I think we pivoted.
That's awesome. Thank you.
So a lot of the feedback we've got is, just minor tweaks and things like that. Oh, we wish this, we wish that. But it's interesting, there's this level of humility in saying like, all right, you're right. We got that wrong, or I never thought about that. And then there's also this level of confidence, kind of like Laurie was talking about, where it's like, well, I've been doing this 9 years and I'm pretty good with money. So I'm not going to listen to that part of your feedback, right? When somebody who's not in the finance industry tells me about, oh, well, people believe this with money. And it's like, well, actually, I've talked to 10,000 people about money. So I'm pretty good at it. So there's this, in between where it's like, okay, I'm the industry expert at this thing. That's why I'm making the app, because I'm one of the best at it. And then the other stuff where it's like, okay, somebody logs onto the app and they don't get it. Well, we got to do some research to understand why, because I might have seen it and thought that it looked cool. But if the user doesn't think that it is, then we got to change it. So there's that thin line between, okay, this is something for them, we got to change it, or this is the reason why I'm creating it, because they don't know any better. And so we're going to bring this to them to help them.
Thank you. I'm looking at the next question and looking at the time. It's 2:30 and we've got maybe 15 minutes to go. The next question that I was going to ask was, what could you tell, what did you learn that could help other people start a business? I think this whole conversation has been a guide to bumping your shin and what you can learn from that and how to respond. So I don't know if we're going to go there. I am going to look and see if there are any questions from the chat. And if Leah and Ben are out there listening in Radio Land. And if there are any questions, can you please chat them? And I'll give you a minute while I filibuster with the backup questions. If there aren't any questions, okay. So if there aren't any questions that pop up, the topic of the year is what a cluster that 2020 is, and what a complicating event this global pandemic has been.
Right.
Could you all speak a little bit about what that has meant as a disruptor, a complicating factor, maybe even an opportunity, and how's 2020 played out for you in its various ways?
Yeah, I can definitely start that one off here too. So COVID obviously caused a lot of travel restrictions. So as you can imagine, with our sort of market really being US-based teams going overseas to help medically, that is pretty much a non-starter. Mm-hmm. So we had a nice pipeline. We were ready with plenty of sales. We were ready to really get rocking in 2020. I was sure this was our year. I would get a salary. I was really excited. That was not meant to be. So that whole pipeline dried up. No one was going to purchase anything that they couldn't use right away, which perfectly makes a lot of sense. So we pivoted pretty quickly to COVID tracking, which makes a ton of sense on paper. However, when we started pitching that to different governments, we realized a lot of the governments where we had a lot of connections opted to go with paper. And so they did a lot of paper tracking just so they could control the messaging and really control the numbers and the figures. And they wanted to own that and not have anyone else seeing that. They saw that as really highly sensitive data. And so unfortunately, that was also a non-starter. So we had to do another pivot. We saw pretty quickly the way that we could help our target market, the ones we were trying to help, which is these humanitarian groups who are helping medically overseas, was to help with virtual care. So when you talk about, talking to your customers, talking to who's actually going to use your stuff, we did that. And they really wanted to start helping those people again, and they couldn't. They were too far away to help. So they would send supplies overseas, but really they didn't have a good way to help medically. And so we're doing some virtual care. So now they can empower their local partners to start seeing patients and send that chart up to the cloud where US-based doctors can give feedback on it and treatment plans, those kind of things, especially for complicated cases where there's no medical specialist, locally. So that's how we're moving forward. So COVID really wrecked 2020 for us. However, I think this virtual care ultimately is going to lead to a much more sustainable process for this entire industry. So I'm really excited about it. I think it's a great way forward. So 2021 is going to be our year.
Well, you got to pass through the gauntlet.
Yeah, right.
There's a question in the chat from Tim Houlihan that kind of addresses a little bit of what you just talked about. And that is, he says, how do you know when to bump up your humility versus stick to your expert guns? And what I was thinking before I asked the COVID question was like that notion of persistence of vision, yet adjustment from the checks or the elbows that you're getting along the way. And that kind of, it's not as much pivoting as it is like tacking a sailboat sometimes, but keeping that wind at your back or your eyes on the prize or whatever you want to call it. Emily, as you answer maybe kind of the COVID question or the questions that we've had, what is that balance between like, I know the world needs this, and now I'm listening better to my clients or customers, and I'm making those adjustments, and I'm taking some elbows. Yeah. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, it is absolutely such a balance. And interestingly, on that note, so I think I sort of overcompensated when we got feedback that was like, hey, there's some things that need to change immediately. I think I overcompensated, and it was like total horizontal leadership no matter what, right? Everything is horizontal leadership. And I actually got feedback from my team that like, hey, love doing this work together, love being in it together. However, we need some structure here, and like there are some decisions that like you need to make on your own based on where you see this thing going. And you can get all the input you want from us and from our community, but that it should inform it. It can't dictate, and that's on you as a leader. And it's a constant balance. I would say it's a constant balance. And for me, where I've been really lucky is just working in this space with people that I really trust, who will give me unfiltered feedback at all times, but who also, I believe, can hold me accountable while trusting my decisions. So yeah, it's really hard. And where COVID comes in for us is, and I almost cringe saying this because it's so horrendous and has wreaked havoc in so many communities, ours included. But it's been an opportunity, if I'm being real, from the sense of, last spring when the restaurant shut down for 3 months, it gave our whole team and fellows time to breathe in a way that we had never had since it was founded in 2016. And it gave us time to think a little bit more about, to detach a little from what Allsquare had become and think a little bit more about where it could be. And is the growth we currently see, is this where we want to go? And actually, it was that time that allowed us to really say, instead of having a second location someday, let's launch this law firm and let's start taking on impact litigation that ties in with our mission. And I'm a lawyer, so I'm actually excited to be in a space where, like, Isaiah, I haven't been the subject matter expert. That's the other thing. When you're the CEO and you're not the subject matter expert, it's like, holy shit. this is really hard. But yeah, so the last thing I'll say, and this is so exciting, I'm so excited to say it. So I don't mean to jinx anything, but we're really unique for us, you guys, is that the ABA, the American Bar Association, has always had this like live synonymous requirement for folks to obtain a JD or a paralegal degree. And COVID has completely dissolved. They've had to course correct and say, you know what, law classes, paralegal classes online. So this whole new infrastructure has been developed to the point where now we can say, you know, you don't need to roll this out in the prisons. Why can't 3 to 4 currently incarcerated scholars enroll in the existing infrastructure? We're good to go. I mean, and I think it's this really beautiful opportunity to really dissolve some of these boundaries between community on the inside and community on the outside. And for us, it's like a year ago, this wouldn't have been possible. And now it's almost like, but wait, why are you saying no? Because like, you know, and post George Floyd too, where like the legal community knows they need to get their shit together. And so, you know, I think it's really, it's been an opportunity, I guess, in ways, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
So COVID was tough because right when we were just getting some traction going, we had a couple talks with big companies around town because we see this as a B2C and a B2B. You know, imagine working at a Fortune 500 company and they offer money verbs as an employee benefit. And companies were like, wow, this is great. Let's take the next step. And then COVID hits and they're like, yeah, we don't know how many people are going to work here. So we'll figure this out next year. We don't know, you know, what our budget's going to be. Like, we can't figure out any more stuff. And, you know, unfortunately, a lot of companies have either laid off people or cut benefits, right? So that was something where it was really tough because we thought we had some really good ideas and some traction. And so now it's like, okay, back to the drawing board. How can we do some more stuff to generate revenue more on our own? And so to kind of tie it into the humility versus the expert, I think it's for me, it was really sticking to why am I creating this company and what am I best at? So when I talk to consumers or users doing research, I'm not best at that. So I'm like, tell me, you know, I'm listening. When I'm talking to the dev team and they're like, you need to do it this way because X, Y, Z, I'm like, okay, awesome. But when I've talked to investors or VC and they're talking about financials, I'm like, no, that's my part, right? I'm really good at that. And, you know, especially in the venture world, one of the things I'm really, really frustrated with right now is the way that they look to capitalize on companies. And so for all of you founders out there, this is big. You got to do whatever you can to try to keep your equity and try to make it a profitable company. Because that's something I'm really, really pushing for is Money Verbs has to be profitable because I'm not going to be one of these companies that just raises money and doesn't make a profit, because the only way for VCs to make money in that scenario is they force you to go public. And, you know, hopefully everybody watching is a founder and we all have the opportunity to go public someday. Right. But yes, knock on wood. But, you know, I think realistically, you look at a company like Robinhood, they're on fire right now, but they've raised over $1 billion because they haven't made a profit. And in my mind, as a financial expert, I'm like, well, you know, the only reason that Coca-Cola is still here and Ford and General Motors, all of these companies had years and years and years of profit. And so you got to build that in. And for me as a finance expert, that's where I stuck to my guns. And so I was like, all right, well, you know, Mr. VC, Mrs. VC, you're not the right fit for me because I'm not going to build my company that way. But when I'm talking to somebody that knows something that I don't know, then I get a little bit more humble and say, all right, I gotta listen to that feedback.
Nice. Thank you. You guys, we're at time. I have to say that this has been an incredible 2 hours because we got to do a whole hour of prep for this too. And it was wonderful to see you last week doing that, or the week before, because everything blends together on Zoom these days. But again, like, thank you so much for sharing these stories with the Twin Cities startup community and beyond, because, you know, what happened with Ecotown with COVID was like, suddenly we're not geographically bound to the Twin Cities. It's like, you know, it blew us nationwide and you're only you're from this far away from Buenos Aires or this far away from Helsinki. And so if we have an audience that's beyond just the Twin Cities, as we turn into something like the to, I don't know, go north or north by north or whatever in the future. Like, we're really grateful to have the experience of you all, and to be able to share some of the difficulties and how to overcome. I really think that line of that narrative about how you keep your eyes on the prize, how you stay humble, take the hits, and adjust is like, those are like all the calisthenics of a startup leader, I think. And you guys have just really told that story in a wonderful way today. So I really appreciate it. In behalf of all the startups out there, thank you for sharing your experience.
Awesome. Thanks for putting us all together.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Three of my favorite people.
It's been fun.
So my trick is that I stick around until the end. But now I'll say goodbye. And hey, hello to everybody that was on the chat. Terry, I swear to God, I'm going to call you because we need to have a Zoom hangout. Bye, everybody. Thanks for coming.